Hello again, Card Muni. It's RJ. It's day 6 of our trip through the 78 top set. It's Friday, still on vacation and enjoying myself, so don't bother me now. Let's keep on going and see what else we got here in the 78 top set. Skip Jutes, Sandy Alomar. Sandy Alomar was Roberto Alomar's daddy, and obviously Sandy Jr.'s dad. He had a lengthy career with a number of teams. Ended up being a coach with the Padres one time. You can see here all the different teams he ended up with through the years from 64 on. Never with a winner, but he certainly had some good years. Like, he was with the Yankees in 76. I don't know if he was up or down or just a utility player. You can see he made it to the World Series, or not the World, but the Championship Series. That's the year they got swept out by the Reds. So, I mean, he had some hints of success, but he was just a long-time journeyman player, quality player who held on and luckily had some good kids. Wilbur Harold, checklist card. Rorick Harrison, check out that name. Who's going to name their kid Rorick? Rorick Harrison, that's a great name. That's Bruce Bochy. Now I don't know which one this is. There's Bruce Bochy and there's Bruce Bochy. The names are the exact same, except the last name's spelled a little differently. I can never tell who the manager was, whether it was this guy or the other guy. I think it was the other guy, Bruce Bochy. Johnny LeMaster, Vic Davalillo. Vic Davalillo was a long-time journeyman player for a number of teams. Here's my Carlton card. Steve Carlton, Larry Cox, Tim Johnson, Larry Harlow, Lenny Randall, serious speed Lenny Randall. Bill Campbell, longtime pitching great. Ted Martinez, John Scott, Billy Hunter. I have no idea who Billy Hunter is, but he was the manager of the Rangers this year. And then Joe Kerrigan. John Mabry. Funny story about John Mabry. John Mabry had a son, John Mabry Jr., who made it to the Phillies about 2009 when we were still good. And John Mabry Jr. was playing for the Phillies one day in the Citizens Bank Park. And I still remember to this day, the cameraman, they found some guy in the stands and they said, look, there's John Mabry Sr., just some guy. And it turned out it wasn't him. He spent like 2 innings. Every time John Mabry did something or the cameraman flashed on John Mabry Jr., they'd flash back to this guy in the stand and say, there's John Mabry admiring what his kid's doing. And it wasn't him. And then finally, the on the field, the guy who's roaming through the stands with the microphone found the real John Mabry, and they had a chance to actually interview him. I just remember it being so funny when I first saw that. Oh my word, the Braves team card, Francisco Barrios, Terry Poole, great player for the Astros in their 1980 World Series, championship games. Joe Coleman, Schweiniger, Ed Armbruster, Tony Soleta, and Paul Mitchell. Don't know any of these guys, I'll tell you. Phil Mankowski, Dave Parker, borderline Hall of Famer. He might make it, and I wouldn't be sad if he did. Dave Parker had the fiercest arm. They called him the Cobra because of the way he'd coil himself when he swung. But, I mean, the guy had a serious arm, great speed, serious power. The guy was a beast. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Charlie Williams, Glenn Burke, Dave Rader. Dave Rader ended up on the Phillies a couple years later. Excuse me. Mick Keller. Gary Koosman, longtime pitcher for the Mets. He also ended up on the Phillies a couple years later. Merv Rettenman, Dick Drago, quality pitcher for a number of teams. Tom Hutton. Tom Hutton was a scrub utility guy through a number of teams, and this year he ended up with the Phillies. Not a long career with the Phillies, but there he was. Larry Sorensen. Love this picture of Dave Kingman. This one really looks airbrushed, like they took Dave Kingman's face and just slapped a Cubs hat and a Cubs jersey around him. That doesn't look at all like a real picture. It really looks like they photoshopped that one. That's your Dave Kingman Cubs card there. Buck Martinez. And the funny thing, Dave Kingman, I'd done this as a trivia question a long time ago. I said, who was the player who hit 4 home runs, who played for 4 different teams one year and hit 2 home runs or more for each of them, and that was Dave Kingman. And if you look here, in 1977, he is with the Mets, the Padres, the Angels, and the Yankees, all in 77. So in 77, he never appeared for the Cubs. Yet here he is on his 1978 card in a Cubs uniform. This is so airbrushed, or whatever the early stages of photography, Photoshop editing were. So, I mean, that's what they did with Dave Kingman's card to make it look great. Buck Martinez, who's an announcer, I think for MLB Network or one of the networks these days, Buck Martinez. Rick Wise. Rick Wise had the distinction for the Phillies one year of pitching a no-hitter, and in the same game, he hit 2 home runs. That's right, a pitcher who hit 2 home runs in one game and threw a no-hitter. Look it up. You know what we did the very next year? We traded him to the Cardinals for a little guy named Steve Carlton. It's a fact, people, it's a fact. Luis Gomez, Bob Lemon. Bob Lemon, interesting story about Bob Lemon. This is the 1978 card, okay? Now, Bob Lemon's the White Sox manager here. It talks about him in the back right here, and it even says down at the bottom, Bob is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Bob Lemon has the unique distinction of being a manager of a World Series winning team, and prior to that happening, having been elected to the Hall of Fame as a player. So in other words, there have been a lot of players who have managed a team to win a World Series who eventually got elected to the Hall of Fame as a player, or managers who had managed teams to World Series berths during or soon after they were elected into the Hall of Fame as managers. But Bob Lemon is the only manager of a World Series team to manage that team to a victory in the World Series and have already been elected to the Hall of Fame as a player. Only one. Interesting little side note. Pat Dobson, Sam Mejias, A's team card, Buzz Capra, Rance Mulligans. Here's your Rod Carew. Look, I'm not sure if he's taking his hat off and putting it back on. Looks like he's about to get up to bat, so he's taking the cap off and putting the helmet on. Lynn McLaughlin, Fran Healy, George Medich, John Hale, Woody Fryman, longtime pitcher Woody Fryman was. Even by this time, I think he'd already been around forever. Yeah, well, since '66, but I mean, Woody's another one of those guys. He played for the Phillies. You can see that in the late '60s, early '70s. He just looked old to me every time I saw Woody Fryman. He just always looked like he'd already been through the war. Ed Goodson, John Uria, Jim Mason, Bob Nepper. Bobby Mercer, longtime player. He was with the Yankees, a good friend of Mickey Mantle's in Mick's later years. George Zebra, Bob Apodaca, love that name always. Dave Skaggs, and Dave Frizzlebin. All right, Dave Frizzlebin. Sixto Lizcano, longtime utility infielder. Gary Wheelock, Steve Dillard, Eddie Solomon, Gary Woods, Frank Tanana, longtime pitcher for the Angels. Really good guy. Gene Mauch, the legendary Gene Mauch. I think Gene Mauch would have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago because he did have a lot of managerial victories. The problem with Gene Mauch is he never won a World Series. I don't even know if he appeared in a World Series because he was with the Phillies in '64 when they lost down the stretch and the Cardinals beat them and they finished third. He was with the Angels in '86 when the Red Sox came back and stomped them to get to the World Series themselves. Gene Mauch, I thought he was a good manager, but whether it was him or, spit of bad luck, I don't know what it was. He could never get his teams over the hump and into the World Series. Poor Mauch. Eric Soderholm, Will McInley, Earl Williams, Rick Rhoden, Pirates team card, Fernando Arroyo, Johnny Grubb, John Denny. John Denny ended up with the Phillies in 1983, won a World Series, not a World Series, but he won the Cy Young for them in '83, and they got to the World Series on the strength of his arm. Here he is with the Cardinals several years before that. Here's Gary Maddox. Gary Maddox from the Giants, we got him, and he was a big part of our World Series team in '80. played for the Phillies for a number of years. He stuck around into the early to mid 80s when a lot of other players had been sold off or traded. Pat Scanlon, Kenny Henderson. Here's Marty Perez, Joe Wallace, Jay Carroll, Pat Kelly, Joe Nolan, Tommy Helms, Thad Bosley, Willie Randolph. I don't know any of those guys up top there. Willie Randolph, longtime great player for the Yankees. And in fact, he was the manager of the Mets around about 2005 through about 2010 when the Phillies started getting good, and we swept him on out of there. And then Craig Swan. So let's put a stop right there for today. Hope you all come back tomorrow. We'll finish this up on Saturday, okay? Thanks for watching.